Okay, so welcome everyone to this special emergency briefing with the IDF on the attack of Iran of yesterday. I would like just to say to the French speakers that we have a translation option on this Zoom call. I will say it in French for them to understand how to do it. Donc, bonsoir tout le monde pour tous ceux qui parlent français et bienvenue sur ce briefing spécial sur l'attaque de l'Iran sur Israël avec Tsahal. Vous avez une option d'obtenir une traduction en français en appuyant sur le bouton traduction, c'est le petit bouton en forme de globe en bas. Donc vous appuyez dessus, vous appuyez sur français et donc ça vous permettra d'avoir la traduction simultanée. That's it for the few words in French. I will give the floor now to the president of ELNET, David Siegel, for a few words of introduction. David, please.
Thank you, Yossi. I'll be very brief. I just think that it's important to highlight the fact that ELNET over the last 15 years has been building an alliance between Europe and Israel. And what we're seeing, and you're seeing now with your own eyes, is that alliance come into force in a way that is not hidden anymore. It was under the surface. And I think we should be very, very proud of the fact that Europe was part of defending Israel last night and the entire region. It was UK forces, French forces, but other countries, both with technology, with political support. The diplomatic statements have been extraordinary. And now you're seeing very senior Israeli politicians speak about this coalition for the first time in Israel's history, that it is fighting as part of a coalition. And this makes things more complicated, but also very, very valuable for our future. And as the president of the Friends of ELNET, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the European politicians that are on this call. Thank you to the teams that have brought hundreds of delegations to Israel over the years. Thank you to the vision of the founders of ELNET to build this alliance, because now we're seeing it come into full visibility. And it's time to speak about it more openly and invest in this relationship for many, many years to come. So without further ado, back to you, Yossi.
Okay, before I give the floor to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, I just want to say that you can write your questions in the box, in the chat box, and then after the brief of Peter Lerner, we will give you the floor for the questions. Please, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yossi, and thank you, David, for making me welcome. And I'm really grateful that we have the opportunity in a time, I would say, within the golden hour of what's happening to address ELNET and your guests. I do think that it is very much important. And I was joking earlier today with Yossi that we did the same thing last week after the tragedy of the WCK. And I think that this is exactly the model. We need to be relevant. We need to be time-worthy. And without further comments, I would just say thank you again for coming to listen. I think with regard to how David talked about the coalition, I think it is the undermining and the most most important component of this event of the last of this last night. It was without a doubt a unity of decent nations that came together to defend Israel, but also for the strategic stability of the region under an American umbrella of the United States Central Command, together with the British Air Force, British capabilities, French capabilities, and regional capabilities that all came together in order to defend and save lives. And this is precisely what we did. In the early hours of, as Saturday was coming to a close yesterday, I got a phone call to report to duty in anticipation for there to be a strike that had been talked about over the last week or so, an expected strike that Iran would initiate. I was at the time at an event listening to a family of a survivor who had been a family member of a hostage that had been released, listening to her story of her family of young baby Abigail, 3 years old, who was abducted into Gaza. And from the very, very solemn story that I had heard of the family of the child, I reported to duty in the evening around 9 p.m. yesterday, and the understanding that it is not only a military event but also an event that will transpire over the media, over the airwaves as it develops. Of course, in anticipation for this attack, the IDF spokesperson's unit and the IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Hagari has been communicating for several days on a daily basis to the people, to society, to understand, to convey precisely what we expect. We expect several various different types of munition to come into Israel. We expect that the people of Israel adhere to the Homefront Command instructions to take cover when they hear sirens, so that we don't face a reality of surprise that people do not know, that people don't know what to do in the case of an alarm. And indeed, when the alarm started to sound yesterday evening, the society came together, people understood what they needed to do, and it allowed the IDF to conduct its operations. We understand, and based on our understanding today, over 300 different types of munitions were fired at Israel, including explosive drones, including ballistic missiles, and including cruise missiles. A total, I would say 30 cruise missiles was the number that we have so far, 170 explosive drones, and around 120 ballistic missiles. I'm very happy to report that all of the drones that were headed our way were all intercepted outside of Israel's airspace. They did not make it. They were either intercepted by our allies or intercepted by us. All of the cruise missiles, the 30 cruise missiles that were launched against Israel from different locations, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Iran, also did not make it to Israel. They were intercepted en route as they tried to make their way to Israel. The ballistic missiles, they have a shorter flight time, and indeed around 12 to 20 minutes flight time from moment of launch until the moment of impact. And in the course of 120 of those being launched against Israel, around 7 reached Israel and hit in and around the airbase in the Negev, Nevatim airbase. Limited damage, very minimal damage to the airbase. The airbase continued to be operational throughout, and indeed, after the Air Force, the pilots from our F-35 Adir squadron finished their operations safeguarding the skies of Israel in the early hours of this morning, they returned to Nevatim Air Base and landed there safely. I think that there are 2 core components of this exchange in the early hours of this morning. The first of all is indeed the coalition. The coalition didn't only come together because they wanted to save Israel. They came together because everybody realizes that Iran is the negative player, the destabilizer of the region, the player that is most interested in disruption and disorganization against, not only against Israel. So when regional players come together, when global players like the British, the French, and the Americans come together, they do it because Iran is behind everything bad for many years now in the region and beyond. In the last 6 months, Iran has been behind all of the actions of Hezbollah that have been conducted. Over 3,000 rockets fired at Israel from Lebanon, has been behind the actions of the Houthis in Yemen, whether it's cruise missiles being fired at Israel or the disruption of the maritime commercial channels in the sea. And of course, the extensive actions of Hamas that continue to be supported both by finance, by training, by munitions, by Iran. So Iran has to be confronted, and I think when the coalition came together, it came together precisely because today it's Israel, tomorrow it could be them. The second component of this is the operational component of dealing with such a very small airspace, a very dense airspace, and being able to act in very close coordination and an ability to actually intercept 99% of what Iran threw at us. This, I think, is the huge success of this exchange, of this war. And I'm glad to say that it was it not only exemplifies the success of the coalition and of the Israeli Air Force and the aerial defense, it is ultimately the failure of Iran in their endeavors and their diabolical actions that they planned on conducting against us. I think that's what I wanted to open with, a very short, brief opening for 10 minutes and then hand it over to questions, because I think that is probably more interesting to you rather than hearing me speak forever.
Well, you were very fast, Peter, and people are just starting to put questions in the chat box. So we have a first question by Jeremy Avardi. Jeremy, you want to ask your question? Jeremy, so I will.
Sorry, yes, I'm unmuted now. My apologies. Hi, sorry, Colonel Lerner, Peter, and thank you very much again for your briefing, and nice to see you again. And my question really, I think, is about the kind of strategic rationale, because beforehand, the narrative, if you like, in the West was of an unpopular war, which much of the West wanted to, well, still wants to end. And Iran has kind of changed that narrative in the last few days onto a reminder of the danger that it itself poses, to not just to Israel, but also to the West itself. Was this not therefore a strategically inept operation? Is that perhaps how we might now come to look at it?
I want to be very cautious in coming to any very drastic conclusions. I think Iran's intentions were negative to begin with. As I said, over the last 6 months, they've been behind all of the actions and hostilities that were created from the 7th of October, but also evolved from the 7th of October. So it was basically only a matter of time until they came from the backstage to the front of the stage. And here they took the action in the early hours of this morning and the late hours of last night, of coming to the front stage in anticipation that they could try and challenge not only, or perhaps they thought it would be only Israel. Perhaps they made that grave mistake. But from our perspective, it was very clear that we would be working with the US, that we would be working under a US umbrella in the capacity of defending Israel and the people of Israel. The ballistic missiles that they fired at us, each one of those had a warhead of around 100 to 120 kilograms. So the amount of damage of 120 ballistic missiles that flew through the air over the course of around 12 to 20 minutes could have been devastating for Israel, but they failed. And I think this is most important, is that the failure is tactical, but also strategic. They failed in how they sought and thought perhaps Israel's standing was, the alliances that we have, and more interestingly, perhaps even more interesting, is the standing that they have with regard to the other players in the region.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Now we'll take the question of Lord Peter Mandelson. Peter?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Peter, for your excellent interview on the BBC this morning. It was extremely effective. I mean, what Iran has done through its inept intervention and the unity shown by Israel's allies is politically highly significant for everyone. It's a real turning point, in my view, in the current situation. So the question arises, therefore, how does one capitalize on it? Where do we go from here? So how will Israel now act? Will it invest further in this coalition, which inevitably means respecting allies' views on what to do next? Or will the government act in Israel's interests as the government sees it and take the fight further to Iran and its proxies and Hamas?
As always, a very, very strong and relevant question. I think there are a lot of questions there that the government will need to answer. And I at this time, probably a bit later today, they will be deliberating the steps forward with regards to what we do next. The IDF has, of course, put a spectrum of potential responses that can be made, and the government will have to decide on their strategy and what they want to gain from what's happened. I do believe that the reality and the situation we face today with Iran is most definitely an opportunity, but there is also a threat of inaction that will create more threats. So I don't envy the government that has to make the decisions.
Thank you. We'll take now the question of MP Paviljonis, the chairman of the Lithuanian Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank
Please.
you. Well, Free Baltic chairman recently expressed solidarity with Israel. We also called for actions against Iran, including listing Revolutionary Guard as terrorist organization. But what would you expect more from particular EU member states or EU or NATO member states? So political, some other actions, please let us know.
Thank you. Again, there's a lot here to be unpackaged for the political echelon from Israel and less from the IDF's perspective. Of course, as we see it, we understand that Iran has, in a way, been able to mobilize and manipulate in its way into a table of relevance. I think they need to be held to account, and they have to pay for being such a hostile player. As I said, most of their actions that we've seen in the last, especially over the last 6 months, but also over many years, have been very much behind the scenes. But when they commandeer freight ships in the Red Sea or in off of the Straits of Hormuz, there needs to be a price to that. And when they decide to attack a sovereign state in such an extensive way, there also needs to be a price for that. The political prices are those that I would suggest that our government extend to you, perhaps in the bilateral relations. From the military's perspective, we need to maintain the freedom to operate, the freedom to engage the enemy wherever they are, and indeed choose that route in order to ensure the safety and security of the people of Israel. Thank you.
I will take the question of MP Dovil Sakalien. Please take the floor.
Yes, colleagues, can you hear me?
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm connected from an inconvenient space, so I can't turn my camera on. Nevertheless, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. So first of all, as much as it is possible to share via this open channel, what next actions by Iran would you anticipate? Another question is, do you think finally there is a chance for United States Congress to put up the Israeli-Ukraine support package for vote? Because that's probably now it's obvious more than ever how necessary that is. And also regarding the global picture, I think that was very correctly mentioned before, that the geopolitical global picture is being ignored a bit. So for Russia, it would be perfect to have a full-scale war going on in the Middle East. So do you see any more active cooperation between Russia and Iran than it was obvious before?
So, of course, the weapons that Iran launched at us, they have been the same type of weapons that have been used and continue to be used in the Ukraine. I would say that again, there are a lot of things there to unpack from a political level, which is not really the area of my responsibility, and I want to be cautious with that. But I would say Iran have said that from their perspective, they've concluded their attack against us. Personally, I don't necessarily believe what they say. I'll be very cautious at believing what they say. And even as they said that in the early hours of this morning, Hezbollah launched more attacks against Israel, more rocket attacks. So their proxies are still up to no good. We need to identify and be prepared for any development that Iran may consider to try and take advantage of the situation, even if they've said it's all over.
Thank you. We'll take now the question of MP Andrew Percy from the House of Commons. Andrew? Andrew, can you hear us?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. Hi, Peter. Andrew Percy from the British House of Commons. I'm in Israel at the moment, so I was watching some of the activity last night, and I'm very proud that the British, the Americans, the Europeans were with you. Can you speak something to the activity of Hezbollah last night? Was it what was expected? And what's the expectation from them and indeed the Houthis in the coming days? Is there an expectation of increased activity? Because it seemed that the Hezbollah activity and involvement last night was rather limited.
Thank you, sir. Over the course of yesterday, before the events of the night, Hezbollah was extremely active. That we saw a peak in their actions during the day, very extensive launches throughout the 48 hours before the Iranian attack against us. So it's a bit hard to say if they were involved or not, or what they saw their role in it. I can say that leading up to the attack, there were questions about what would Hezbollah do and to what extent. And as I said, just this morning, they continued to fire rockets at us again, and we conducted a counterstrike in Lebanon against Hezbollah infrastructure, where they are conducting their industry of creating and making rockets, weaponry, and so on. So I would say Hezbollah are still, since the 8th of October, have been conducting a war against us. They have launched over 3,000 rockets at Israel. They've conducted cross-border attacks. They've conducted drone attacks, explosive drone attacks. And so, and if today said anything, has shown anything, we've not seen any major change. They did participate yesterday, albeit at a lower level during the course of the action, and we did have some rockets in the northern Golan Heights from Lebanon and from Syria. And I would say that I think what would be reasonable to say is that the orchestra that Iran is managing, they use different instruments at different times for different tones. And so yesterday it was their day to shine, and Hezbollah was perhaps a bit on the back burner at the night, but immediately back into action this morning. And throughout the course of yesterday beforehand, they were very active.
Thank you. We'll take now the question of Pierre Dessas, the chairman of ELNET France. Pierre. You are on mute, Pierre.
Thank you very much. Hello, Peter, and thank you very much to be with us and for your analysis. I have two questions. The first one seems to me very important. If USA confirmed that you will not support totally militarily Israel, what could be the limit of the answer of Israel? Another question is, for the first time, we saw Arab country defending Israel, mainly Jordan. What do you think about it? It's the first in the history.
Very serious questions there you asked, sir. Thank you. I would say, with regard to reaction, I think the government will have to make the decision. I think what it will be at the top of the priority list will be the welfare, the safety and security of Israel. And any steps that they decide to instruct us, the IDF, to conduct will be based on that interest. That will be first and foremost. Of course, we take into serious consideration the coalition that came together in defense of Israel, and I think it's a very relevant question that you asked. Regarding the second component with the involvement of regional players, and I will not go into too much into specifics, but there is mutual interests in this region, and those mutual interests are superimposed when it comes to Iran. Iran is a very, very serious threat to so many different players in this region, and therefore we believe that this attack and the coalition that came in order to thwart that attack can actually gain and grow strategically in order to confront Iran in the future.
Thank you.
We'll take the question of Lord Pollack now.
Thank you. Hello, Peter. I guess my question is slightly more political, but hopefully you might be able to deal with it. And that is the IRGC. You know, the Americans have prescribed, Britain has been talking about it, not getting there. How important would that be as a message to the Iranians if the rest of the Western world got together and prescribed the IRGC? Thank you.
The IRGC is I think is a menace, is a dangerous menace, and is a menace that needs to be dealt with. If they are not prescribed, then they have a free hand to operate, and we know that they operate worldwide. They have no regard for the rules and regulations. They operate and conduct their activities wherever they feel that they can, and therefore they need to be put into a corner and they need to be prevented from acting. How can we do that? I think identifying them, singling them out, making sure that they cannot have a free flow of funds. I think these are the ways that we need to deal with such hostile players. So that, I think, again, that is indeed more on the political arena, but it has security and defense implications, and therefore I allow myself to comment on it. The IRCG are the hostile player of the hostile players.
Thank you. We'll take now the question of the Polish news agency TVP. Please ask your question. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry if we don't have camera because of some technical issues on our end, but I hope it doesn't. It isn't that much of an issue. I wanted to ask you one question. Israeli intelligence and military knew about the Hamas attack 1 year before, so on October 7th, 1 year before it happened, but unfortunately deemed it aspirational and too difficult to carry out. It was unfortunately wrong. Yesterday, we saw also initial numbers of drones being in the dozens, and later we learned that they were in the hundreds. Of course, the attack was very skillfully intercepted, but is there some work to be done on the Israeli intelligence end?
I think there were lessons learned already from the failures of the 7th of October. And of course, some of them were implemented in the course of yesterday. I think the initial identification of the first load or the first wave of drones on way to Israel was accurate. And as the action against us developed, therefore we came forward and announced it to the Israeli public so that they know what to expect and as it developed throughout the course of the night. So the failures of the 7th of October are core at the tragedy of the attack. But there are lots that needs to be learned from that, from the strategic level through the operational level and through to the tactical level. And the IDF is currently conducting its internal investigations. It's after action review to try and make the lessons learned in order to make sure that this type of attack can never happen again.
Thank you very much, sir.
We'll take now the question of the Italian journalist Stefano Piazza. Stefano?
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Colonel, merci. Je pose
in English, if you can, Stefano. You want to ask in French or?
Yes, in French, is possible?
Okay, I will translate you. Go for it.
Okay. La question que je pose, c'est si on a des nouvelles respect à les questions sur les otages, existe encore une tractative sur cette question et comment ça marche les opérations de préparation pour l'opération à Rafah.
Okay, so the question is about the hostages, Peter. Do we know what's happening with the hostages? Do the IDF still trying to rescue them? And the second question is about the operation in Rafah. What do we know about the future operation in Rafah?
Merci beaucoup, Stefano. With regard, first of all, to the hostages. So first, and I think it does relate also to Rafah. The Prime Minister's office today, through the Mossad via the Prime Minister's office early this morning, announced that Hamas had turned away from the proposal, the agreement to release hostages. They decided to turn down the suggestion, the proposal, and so it leaves us currently without a diplomatic channel. With regard to operational channels, so there's basically two ways to bring home hostages, either through diplomacy or through operations, special operations, military operations. And it does relate to the question about Rafah, because 7 weeks ago, the IDF conducted a rescue operation in Rafah. We brought home 2 hostages alive. And indeed, in the extraction of the hostages, we found that our forces came under heavy fire by Hamas gunmen, exemplifying that Hamas is still very much in control of the Rafah area. So we know that hostages are in Rafah. We know that Hamas are very strong in Rafah, basically untouched. In order for us to fulfill our goals of bringing home the hostages, every last one of them out of the 133, and dismantling and destroying Hamas as a governing authority of the Gaza Strip, in order for us to be successful in that, the path to that goes through Rafah. So from our perspective, we are making the necessary preparations, which include an evacuation plan for civilians to get them out of harm's way on one hand, but indeed, based on intelligence, conducting ground operations against those hubs of control, of command, of perhaps where hostages are being held. We will pursue Hamas wherever they are.
Thank you. We'll take the question of David Siegel, the president of ELNET. David?
Yes, Peter, again, thank you so much for your time with us today. Very valuable. I have 2 questions. One is really about ELNET's work all these years. So here we are seeing the product of years and years of investment of at least the Israeli Air Force and the air defenses with partners and allies in the region and in Europe. Can you say a few words about how significant that is, how many years, who is behind it? You see reports of the Air Force over Greece and over Cyprus and over Romania, and there's a lot happening, but it seems to be under the surface. And it's important for people to understand how significant Europe is to Israel's defense. And I think it's clear now, but I'd appreciate a word or two from you. And the second question is, can you say, even though you're not a politician, a few words about what might happen next? Does Israel respond does it not respond? What are the strategic considerations, which I think you can do? What is the upside and what is the downside? If Israel doesn't respond, here is Iran changing the strategic rules of the game in the Middle East. And there's talk about Israel having to change its entire defense thinking now into a new reality that we're in and a new Middle East that we're in. So what are the downsides and what are the upsides of Israel responding militarily right now? Thank you.
Thanks, David. So first question, of course, Israel, I think, is deeply connected to Europe, despite of our being on the fringe of the geography of Europe, and perhaps sometimes we'd prefer to be closer geographically. But we have like-minded problems, we have like-minded challenges, we have like-minded threats, and therefore we have like-minded security interests and defense interests. Sometimes it appears that Israel is the forward operating base of Europe with regard to defense issues. And we've seen throughout the course of many years how we identify and see that the very, very similar challenges that many of us are addressed with, whether it's in times of war, in times of peace, even with force building, and in times of terrorist attacks. So I think that underlines the importance of the relationship. I think also, though, that the military-to-military relationship is, over the last, I retired 7 years ago from the military into reserve duty. And the strides that the relationship between the IDF and its European counterparts is really, it's extraordinary. It's intimate on many ways. I think military to military, the understanding, the deep understanding of how it is, how to conduct combat, how can we be better together, what we can learn from one another, I think is extremely important. And I think, and I would add, I think I've known Yossi and David, I've known you both for many, many years in my former role as an IDF spokesperson way back when I took the role in 2013. And so I think I was very, very well acquainted with ELNET in the early stages of your organization. And I think you have been a force multiplier in creating and probably more importantly, cultivating the relationships that sometimes all of us are too busy with what we actually have to do today or tomorrow with our own problems. And so thank you for what ELNET does. With regard to the strategic implications, so on the spectrum, there is the issue of inaction as opposed to action. And I'll throw in a couple of ideas that are circulating that do not necessarily represent official policy, but just to give you a grasp and relate to what your question. So the policy of inaction against hostilities, it rings a very similar tone to Israel's posture towards Gaza, towards Hamas. So if we do not conduct action against Iran, will we be ending up with Iranians in our bedrooms, abducting, killing, massacring? Is a question that needs to be asked. So that's one question of inaction. On the other side of the spectrum is the action, the depth, the width, and what type of action can be conducted. And I would say that there is a very, very broad spectrum of things that can be done that will not necessarily take the equilibrium out of balance, but maintain a very, very clear posture against hostile activities towards Israel and other places. But also, but that is I would say, a very fine line. We need to be very cautious. We need to understand the strategic implications. And as I said, I don't envy the government that have to make the decision of what to do.
Thank you. Do we have room for one or more two questions, Peter?
I think I have to finish. I have to run off to my next event.
Okay.
One more.
Just one more. I will ask it. Linda Aguilera is asking if there were any cyber attacks yesterday in parallel of the airstrikes.
I'm not aware of any cyber attacks against Israel in the last 24 hours, or nothing extraordinary, I would say. So there's always different activities. I'm not aware of anything.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much all for participating to this briefing.
Thank you.